Marcus Williams thought he had the perfect marriage until strange signs began surfacing. Secretive text messages, late nights at the office, and Sophia's sudden indifference to his career milestones. When suspicion turned to certainty, Marcus made a decision that would either destroy everything he'd worked for or save him from a nightmare he never saw coming. It all started when he told his wife, "I got fired today." Those 4 words escaped his lips like a bullet, and what happened next would shatter every belief he held about love and loyalty. Wait, before we continue, hit that subscribe button. You've already invested time in this story, and I promise you won't want to miss the twist coming up. Hit like if you're ready to dive deeper, and let me know where you're watching from. New York, Los Angeles, or Chicago. Your support helps bring these stories to those who need to hear them. Now let's get back to the moment when Marcus realized his perfect life was built on a foundation of lies. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hardwood floors of their Buckhead home as Marcus Williams adjusted his tie in the master bedroom mirror. At 30, he had achieved what many considered the American dream, a successful career as a senior software engineer at Technova Solutions, a beautiful wife, in a lifestyle that spoke of careful planning and hard work. The reflection staring back at him showed a man who had come far from his modest beginnings in Detroit, where his mother had raised him alone after his father walked out when Marcus was 12. His broad shoulders and athletic build spoke of weekend basketball games and early morning gym sessions, but it was his sharp intellect that had carried him through Georgia Tech and into the upper echelons of Atlanta's tech scene. Sophia emerged from their walk-in closet, her blonde hair catching the morning light as she slipped on a pair of designer heels. Even after 4 years of marriage, she still took his breath away. They had met at a technology conference in 2019, where she was representing a marketing firm and he was presenting on cybersecurity innovations. The attraction had been immediate and mutual. She was drawn to his quiet confidence and intellectual depth, while he was captivated by her vivacious personality and business acumen. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of weekend trips to Savannah, intimate dinners in Virginia Highland, and long conversations about building a future together. But lately, something had shifted in the carefully orchestrated rhythm of their life. Sophia's marketing job at Pinnacle Creative had always demanded long hours, but her schedule had become increasingly erratic over the past 3 months. She would leave early for mysterious breakfast meetings and return home well past 9, claiming urgent client presentations and strategy sessions. When Marcus tried to engage her in conversation about his recent promotion to lead architect, a position that came with a $50,000 bonus, she had offered only a distracted congratulations before turning her attention back to her phone. The woman who once celebrated his victories as enthusiastically as her own now seemed more interested in whoever was sending those constant text messages that made her smile in ways Marcus hadn't seen in months. The changes were subtle but unmistakable to someone who had studied systems and patterns for a living. Sophia had always been protective of her phone, but now she carried it everywhere, even to the bathroom, and had started sleeping with it under her pillow instead of on the nightstand. Their conversations, once flowing and intimate, had become superficial exchanges about household logistics and weekend plans. Most troubling of all, she had stopped asking about his work entirely. The same career that had once fascinated her enough to spend hours discussing coding frameworks and project management methodologies. It was as if she had mentally checked out of their partnership while physically remaining present. Last Tuesday evening had crystallized his growing unease into something approaching dread. Marcus had arrived home early, hoping to surprise Sophia with dinner from her favorite Ethiopian restaurant in Little 5 Points. He found her on the back deck, pacing and speaking in hushed tones into her phone. The moment she spotted him through the French doors, she quickly ended the call and greeted him with an enthusiasm that felt forced and unnatural. When he asked about the call, she claimed it was her sister discussing wedding planning for their cousin's upcoming ceremony, an explanation that might have satisfied him if her sister hadn't been at a yoga retreat in Costa Rica with no cell phone access for the entire week. Standing now in their bedroom, watching Sophia gather her things for another mysterious day at the office, Marcus felt the weight of accumulated doubts pressing against his chest. The woman he had planned to spend his life with, who had stood beside him at his mother's funeral 2 years ago and promised they would face everything together, seemed to be drifting away on a current he couldn't see or understand. His engineering mind demanded logical explanations for the data points that didn't add up, but his heart feared what those explanations might reveal. As Sophia kissed his cheek goodbye, a brief, perfunctory gesture that lacked the warmth of earlier years, Marcus made a decision that would set everything in motion. He was going to find out what was really happening, no matter how much the truth might cost him. 3 days after the incident on the deck, Marcus found himself leaving work at 4 in the afternoon, something he rarely did without advance notice. A migraine had been building behind his temples since his morning meeting with the development team, and his project manager had insisted he go home early rather than push through another late night at the office. The drive from Technova's glass tower in Midtown to their Buckhead neighborhood usually took 40 minutes in Atlanta traffic, but today the roads were surprisingly clear, depositing him in his driveway a full hour before his usual arrival time. As he pulled into the garage, Marcus noticed Sophia's white BMW parked in its usual spot, unusual for a Thursday afternoon when she typically had client meetings across town. The house felt different as he stepped inside, charged with an energy that made the hair on his arms stand up. Sophia's voice drifted from somewhere deeper in the house, speaking in tones he hadn't heard her use in months. There was an intimacy to her words, a softness that transported him back to their early dating days, when she would curl up on his couch and tell him about her dreams of starting her own marketing consultancy. Marcus set his laptop bag down quietly in the foyer and followed the sound of her voice toward the back of the house. She was in the sunroom, a space they had converted into her home office during the pandemic, surrounded by white furniture and plants that caught the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Her back was turned to the doorway as she spoke into her phone, her free hand gesturing animatedly despite being invisible to whoever held her attention on the other end of the line. The words that reached his ears made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. "Derek, you know I hate waiting like this," Sophia was saying, her voice carrying the kind of exasperation reserved for intimate conversations between people who had shared countless similar discussions. "The plan is almost complete, but we need to be smart about timing. Marcus doesn't suspect anything yet, but I can't keep pretending much longer." She paused, apparently listening to Derek's response, and Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis as he processed the implications of what he was hearing. Derek Richardson. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow, bringing with it memories he had tried to dismiss as paranoid overthinking. Derek was Sophia's former colleague from her previous job at Meridian Marketing, a smooth-talking account executive who had always rubbed Marcus the wrong way during the handful of times they had met at company parties and industry events. There was something about Derek's confident smile and the way his eyes lingered on Sophia that had triggered Marcus's protective instincts, though Sophia had always dismissed his concerns as baseless jealousy. She had left Meridian 18 months ago to join Pinnacle Creative, claiming she wanted a fresh start and new challenges, but apparently some connections had proven difficult to sever completely. "I know, baby, I know," Sophia continued, and the endearment hit Marcus like a sledgehammer to his sternum. "Just a little longer, and then we can be together properly. Once I'm free of him, we can take that trip to Santorini you keep talking about." Her laugh was musical and genuine, the same laugh that had made him fall in love with her at that technology conference 4 years ago. Now it sounded like mockery, like evidence of a betrayal so complete it made him question every moment of happiness they had shared. Marcus pressed himself against the wall outside the sunroom, his heart hammering against his ribs as he strained to hear every word of the conversation that was dismantling his life in real time. Sophia's tone had shifted to something more businesslike, more calculating than the romantic warmth of moments before. "We need to wait for the right moment to make our move," she said. "I'm thinking about how to handle the separation, how to make sure I get what I deserve after putting up with this charade for so long." The casual cruelty of her words, referring to their marriage as a charade, made Marcus's hands clench into fists at his sides. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, during which Marcus learned that Derek had apparently been pressuring Sophia to leave him for months, that they had been meeting regularly at a hotel in Buckhead just minutes from the home Marcus had bought for their future together, and that Sophia had been carefully documenting their shared assets in preparation for what she euphemistically called the transition. She spoke about their marriage with the detached analysis of a business consultant evaluating an underperforming investment, discussing the house, their joint savings account containing $400,000, and even Marcus's recent promotion as factors to consider in her exit strategy. When Sophia finally ended the call with promises to see Derek later that evening, Marcus remained frozen against the wall, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what he had discovered. The woman he had trusted with his heart, his future, and his financial security had been systematically planning his betrayal while he worked 60-hour weeks to provide the lifestyle she enjoyed. Every late night at the office, every mysterious phone call, every distant moment over the past 3 months suddenly made perfect sense, fitting together like pieces of a puzzle he had been too trusting to recognize. As Sophia's footsteps approached the doorway, Marcus quickly retreated to the kitchen, grabbing a glass from the cabinet and filling it with water to create the illusion of normal activity. When she appeared moments later, her face brightened with the kind of performative enthusiasm he now recognized as purely theatrical. "Marcus, you're home early," she said, moving to kiss his cheek with lips that had just been speaking words of love to another man. "How was your day, honey?" The question felt like salt in an open wound, delivered with an innocence that was revealed as completely artificial in light of what he had just overheard. That night, Marcus lay in bed beside the woman who had just shattered his world, listening to her steady breathing while his mind raced through possibilities and scenarios like a computer running endless calculations. Sleep eluded him as he stared at the ceiling, replaying every word of Sophia's conversation with Derek and trying to reconcile the loving wife he thought he knew with the calculating stranger who had been sharing his bed. By 3 a.m, he had reached a conclusion that crystallized with the cold clarity of mathematical proof. If Sophia truly loved him, she would stand by him during genuine hardship. If she didn't, a crisis would expose her true intentions faster than months of surveillance or confrontation. The next morning, Marcus called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years, claiming a stomach bug that would require him to stay home and recover. After Sophia left for another day of supposed client meetings, he spent the morning researching Georgia's divorce laws with the methodical thoroughness he applied to debugging complex code. What he discovered both alarmed and empowered him. Georgia was a no-fault divorce state, but adultery could still influence alimony decisions and asset distribution. If he could document Sophia's affair and her premeditated planning to leave him, he might be able to protect himself from the financial devastation she was apparently orchestrating. His next call went to James Morrison, his roommate from Georgia Tech, who had gone on to become a family law attorney in Atlanta. James had been the best man at their wedding, and Marcus trusted him implicitly with both legal matters and personal confidences. When James answered on the second ring, his voice carried the warmth of old friendship mixed with professional concern as Marcus explained his situation in carefully measured terms. "Brother, I'm sorry you're going through this," James said after hearing the basic facts. "But you're smart to call me before things get ugly. Georgia law can be tricky when it comes to marital assets, especially when one party has been planning an exit strategy." James explained that their joint savings account, containing nearly $400,000 accumulated over 4 years of marriage, would typically be split equally in a divorce. However, if Marcus could prove that Sophia had been conducting an affair while planning to leave him, the courts might view her actions as dissipation of marital assets if she had spent money on her relationship with Derek. More importantly, any evidence of premeditated abandonment could influence spousal support decisions. "The key is documentation," James emphasized. "You need clear evidence of her intentions and actions. Recordings, if you can get them legally. Financial records showing unusual expenditures. Anything that demonstrates a pattern of deception and planning." With James's advice echoing in his mind, Marcus began formulating a strategy that felt both necessary and deeply painful. He would create a controlled crisis, a situation that would force Sophia to reveal her true priorities without putting himself at legal risk. The plan that emerged was elegantly simple. He would tell Sophia he had lost his job, then observe her reaction and document whatever followed. If she loved him as she claimed, she would offer support, encouragement, and partnership in facing their difficulties. If her primary attachment was to his income and lifestyle, she would reveal that truth through her actions and words. The beauty of the test lay in its reversibility. Marcus could later claim he had been offered his job back or had received a better offer elsewhere. No permanent damage would be done to his actual career or financial standing, But the temporary crisis would create the perfect laboratory conditions to examine Sophia's character. It was a controlled experiment designed to generate data about the most important variable in his life, whether his wife's love was genuine or conditional upon his ability to provide the affluence she enjoyed. Marcus spent the afternoon setting up the technical infrastructure for his investigation. He installed a voice recording app on his phone, researched the legality of recording conversations in Georgia, a one-party consent state where he could legally record any conversation he participated in, and began documenting their financial accounts with screenshots and statements. The joint checking account showed a balance of $63,000, while their savings held $347,000. Their investment portfolio, largely funded by his stock options and bonuses, was worth another $215,000. The house, purchased 3 years ago for $850,000, had appreciated to nearly $1 million in Atlanta's booming real estate market. As evening approached, Marcus found himself thinking about his mother, Dorothy Williams, who had raised him in Detroit's tough East Side after his father abandoned them. She had worked 2 jobs, cleaning office buildings at night and stocking shelves at a grocery store during the day, to keep food on their table and pay the rent on their cramped apartment. Despite the hardship, she had never shown bitterness or self-pity, instead teaching Marcus that adversity revealed people's true character. "Baby," she used to tell him while helping with the homework at their kitchen table, "you'll know who really loves you when the money runs out and the good times stop coming. Fair weather friends disappear when storms hit, but real love stays in fights." Dorothy had died of ovarian cancer 2 years ago, just 6 months before she could see Marcus achieve the financial security she had sacrificed so much to make possible. During her final weeks, Sophia had seemed genuinely devoted, bringing soup to the hospital and sitting for hours reading to the older woman while Marcus worked to pay the mounting medical bills. At the funeral, Sophia had held his hand as he delivered the eulogy, tears streaming down her face as he spoke about his mother's strength and wisdom. Now Marcus wondered if even those tears had been performance, part of the elaborate deception that was apparently their entire marriage. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was about to test whether Sophia possessed the same qualities his mother had embodied: loyalty, resilience, and the ability to love someone regardless of their circumstances. Dorothy Williams would have stayed by her husband's side through unemployment, illness, or any other crisis life might have thrown at them. She had proven that commitment by raising their son alone when her husband chose the easy path of abandonment over the hard work of partnership. Now Marcus would discover whether he had chosen a woman capable of that same steadfast love, or whether his substantial income had been the primary foundation of Sophia's affection all along. By evening, Marcus had refined his plan to include specific details that would make his story believable while creating maximum emotional impact. He would claim that budget cuts had eliminated his entire department, that his severance package would last only 3 months, and that finding another position at his current salary level might take 6 months or longer in the competitive tech market. If Sophia was truly committed to their marriage, she would see the crisis as a challenge they could overcome together. If her commitment was conditional, the prospect of financial instability would likely accelerate whatever timeline she and Derek had established for their escape plan. Friday evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. Marcus sat in his car in the driveway for several minutes, rehearsing the words he had practiced dozens of times in his mind. The voice recording app was already running on his phone, hidden in his jacket pocket, where Georgia's one-party consent laws would make it admissible evidence if it needed. His hands trembled slightly as he turned off the engine, not from fear of the confrontation ahead, but from the terrible certainty that his suspicions were about to be confirmed. The man who had built complex software systems and debugged million-dollar projects was about to execute the most important test of his life. Sophia was in the kitchen when he entered, preparing what appeared to be an elaborate dinner of herb-crusted salmon and roasted vegetables. She looked up with a smile that seemed genuinely warm, and for a moment Marcus felt a flicker of doubt about what he was about to do. Perhaps he had misunderstood the phone conversation. Perhaps there was an innocent explanation for everything he had witnessed. But then he remembered Derek's name spoken with such tenderness, and the resolve returned to his chest like cold steel. "You're home right on time," Sophia said, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "I thought we could have a nice dinner together. We haven't done that in weeks." Her consideration felt authentic, which made what Marcus was about to do feel even more necessary. If this attentiveness was genuine, she would prove it through her response to crisis. If it was manipulation designed to maintain her comfortable lifestyle until she was ready to abandon ship, that truth would emerge just as clearly. Marcus loosened his tie and sat heavily at the kitchen island, allowing exhaustion to show in his posture and expression. The performance required method acting of the highest caliber, drawing on every ounce of genuine stress he had experienced over the past week. "Sophia, we need to talk," he began, his voice carrying the weight of manufactured devastation. "Something happened at work today, and it's going to change everything for us." The concern that immediately appeared in Sophia's eyes looked real enough to give Marcus pause. She set down the kitchen towel and moved toward him, her hand reaching for his shoulder in a gesture of comfort that felt like the woman he had fallen in love with 4 years ago. "What is it, honey? You look terrible. Did something happen with your project?" Marcus took a deep breath, meeting her eyes directly as he delivered the words that would either save or destroy his marriage. "I got fired today." The 4 syllables hung in the air between them like a suspended sentence, and he watched Sophia's face carefully for any micro-expression that might reveal her true thoughts. Her initial reaction appeared to be genuine shock. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly, and her hand tightened on his shoulder in what seemed like an instinctive gesture of support. "Oh my God, Marcus. What happened? Why would they fire you?" The questions tumbled out with apparent authenticity, and Sophia pulled a chair closer to sit beside him. Her body language suggested engagement and concern, but Marcus forced himself to remember that she worked in marketing, where emotional manipulation was a professional skill set. Still, her performance was convincing enough that he almost felt guilty about the deception he was perpetrating. Marcus launched into the fabricated story he had constructed, explaining that budget cuts had eliminated his entire department and that his severance package would only cover 3 months of their current expenses. He mentioned the mortgage on their house, their car payments, and the lifestyle they had built together, watching carefully as each financial reality registered on Sophia's face. For the first 20 minutes of their conversation, she maintained her supportive demeanor, offering encouragement about his marketable skills and the strong tech job market in Atlanta. But when Marcus began discussing the timeline for finding new employment and the possibility that he might need to accept a significant salary reduction, subtle changes began appearing in Sophia's responses. Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, her eye contact became less direct, and her questions started focusing more on the duration of their financial difficulties than on his emotional state or their strategies for weathering the crisis together. The transformation was gradual enough that someone less observant might have missed it, but Marcus was watching with the analytical focus of an engineer studying system failures. The turning point came when Marcus mentioned that they might need to downsize their lifestyle, possibly selling the house and moving to a more affordable neighborhood. "We've got substantial savings," he said, testing her reaction. "But if this job search takes longer than expected, we might need to make some difficult decisions about our future." Sophia's response, a barely perceptible flinch followed by a forced smile, told him everything he needed to know about her priorities and the foundation of her commitment. "Of course, darling," she said, but her voice carried a new tension that hadn't been there moments before. "We'll figure it out together. I should probably call my sister and cancel that weekend trip we planned to Charleston. And maybe we should look at our budget more carefully." Her willingness to sacrifice a weekend getaway felt calculated rather than heartfelt, as if she was performing the role of the supportive wife while her mind raced toward other priorities. Marcus excused himself to take a shower, claiming he needed to wash away the stress of the day and think about their next steps. But instead of heading to the bathroom, he positioned himself near the top of the stairs where he could hear Sophia's side of any phone conversations that might follow his revelation. He didn't have to wait long. Within minutes of his supposed departure, he heard the distinctive sound of Sophia's phone dialing and her voice dropping to the whispered tones he had learned to associate with her secret communications. "Derek, we have a problem," she began, and Marcus felt his heart turn to stone in his chest. "Marcus just told me he lost his job today. This could change everything about our timeline." The transition from concerned wife to conspirator took less than 5 minutes, confirming every suspicion Marcus had harbored about the true nature of his marriage. As Sophia continued her conversation, discussing how his unemployment might affect their plans and whether they should accelerate the schedule. Marcus felt the last vestiges of hope drained from his body like blood from a wound. The woman downstairs wasn't comforting her devastated husband or strategizing about their mutual survival. She was updating her accomplice about a complication in their scheme to extract maximum value from a marriage she had never intended to honor. Marcus had designed the perfect test, and the results were unambiguous. His marriage was over. It had been over long before he suspected anything was wrong. Now all that remained was determining how to protect himself from the financial and emotional devastation that Sophia and Derek had been planning in secret. Saturday morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Sophia had left early for what she claimed was a yoga class, though Marcus suspected she was meeting Derek to discuss their revised timeline in light of his supposed unemployment. As soon as her BMW disappeared around the corner, Marcus retrieved his laptop and began the systematic documentation of evidence that would protect him in the legal battle ahead. He downloaded their phone records, photographed their financial statements, and compiled a timeline of Sophia's suspicious behavior over the past 3 months. Every detail mattered now. This was no longer about saving his marriage, but about preventing its destruction from ruining his financial future. When Sophia returned home around noon, she found Marcus sitting at their kitchen table with documents spread before him like a general planning a campaign. Her greeting was overly cheerful, the performance of a woman who believed she still controlled the narrative of their relationship. "How are you feeling today, honey? I know yesterday was such a shock." Her concern felt rehearsed, delivered with the practiced sincerity of someone who had been coaching herself on appropriate responses to her husband's crisis. Marcus looked up from his papers with a calm expression that immediately shifted the energy in the room. Something in his eyes, a clarity and purpose that hadn't been there the night before, made Sophia pause in the doorway as if sensing danger she couldn't yet identify. "Sophia, we need to have a conversation about honesty," he said, his voice carrying none of the devastation from the previous evening. "Please sit down." The transformation in Marcus's demeanor was complete and unmistakable. Gone was the defeated man who had stumbled home with news of unemployment. In his place sat someone who radiated controlled power, the same focused intensity he brought to solving complex engineering problems. Sophia approached the table cautiously, her marketing instincts apparently warning her that something fundamental had changed in their dynamic overnight. "I have something to tell you," Marcus continued, reaching into his jacket pocket to retrieve his phone. "I never got fired, Sophia. Those words, 'I got fired today,' were nothing more than an experiment." He set the phone on the table between them, and Sophia's face went pale as she recognized the recording app interface still running on his screen. "Everything you said to Derek last night after I went upstairs is documented. Every word of your conversation about accelerating your timeline and changing your plans because of my supposed financial difficulties." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake, her mind clearly racing through the implications of what Marcus had just revealed. Her careful facade crumbled in real time, replaced by a mixture of panic and calculation as she tried to determine how much damage had been done to her position. "Marcus, I can explain," she began, but her voice lacked conviction, as if she already knew that explanations were inadequate for the magnitude of her deception. "Can you explain Derek?" Marcus asked, his tone remaining conversational despite the devastating nature of his questions. "Can you explain your conversations about waiting for the right moment to leave me? Can you explain why you referred to our marriage as a charade that you've been putting up with?" Each question landed like a physical blow, and Sophia's composure disintegrated further with each revelation of how much he actually knew about her secret life. Sophia's first instinct was denial, a desperate attempt to gaslight him into questioning what he had heard with his own ears. "You're taking things out of context," she insisted, her voice rising with manufactured indignation. "Derek and I are just friends. Those conversations don't mean what you think they mean." But even as she spoke, her eyes darted toward her purse, as if calculating whether she could reach her phone to warn Derek about this unexpected development. Marcus reached into the folder beside him and pulled out printed screenshots of their joint bank account statements, highlighted to show irregular cash withdrawals totaling nearly $15,000 over the past 2 months. "These withdrawals correspond exactly with your secret meetings with Derek," he said calmly. James Morrison, you remember my lawyer friend from college, explained that using marital assets to fund an extramarital affair constitutes dissipation of marital property under Georgia law. It affects how assets are divided in divorce proceedings. The mention of legal representation shifted Sophia's strategy from denial to negotiation, the same pivot she might make when a client relationship turned adversarial. Marcus, we don't need lawyers involved in this. We can work things out between ourselves like adults. Her attempt to regain control of the situation was transparent but desperate, revealing how unprepared she was for the possibility that Marcus might have anticipated and planned for her betrayal. I've already filed preliminary paperwork with James, Marcus replied, producing another document from his folder. In Georgia, adultery can influence both alimony decisions and asset distribution. Your conversations with Derek, combined with evidence of financial planning for your departure, demonstrate what the law calls willful abandonment of the marriage. The technical language had the desired effect. Sophia realized that Marcus wasn't speaking from emotion, but from careful legal preparation. As if summoned by the intensity of the confrontation, Derek Richardson chose that moment to appear at their front door. His confident knock and subsequent entry suggested he still believed he held the upper hand in whatever game he and Sophia had been playing. Derek was everything Marcus wasn't. Smooth where Marcus was straightforward, charming where Marcus was authentic, superficially polished where Marcus had earned his success through genuine competence. His presence in Marcus's home felt like a violation that went beyond mere adultery into something approaching burglary. "What's going on here?" Derek demanded, his tone suggesting he expected to intimidate Marcus into submission through sheer audacity. "Sophia called me upset about some misunderstanding." He moved towards Sophia as if to physically shield her from Marcus's questions, apparently believing that Marcus would respond to confrontation with the weakness Derek projected onto all husbands who had been deceived by their wives. Marcus stood slowly, his 6'2" frame and athletic build suddenly seeming more imposing than usual. But instead of responding with anger or violence, he addressed Derek with the same controlled calm he had shown Sophia. "There's no misunderstanding, Derek. I have recordings of your conversations about your relationship with my wife and your plans to help her leave me. I have financial records showing her use of our joint assets to fund your affair. And I have legal representation preparing divorce papers that will ensure she receives exactly what she deserves under Georgia law." Derek's confident facade cracked as he processed the implications of Marcus's words. He had apparently expected to find a broken, desperate man who could be manipulated or intimidated. Instead, he faced someone who had outmaneuvered him completely, turning what Derek thought was his moment of triumph into a legal and financial catastrophe. "This is harassment," Derek blustered, but his voice lacked the authority of someone who believed his own threats. "This is justice," Marcus corrected. "You're both welcome to continue your relationship, but you'll do it without the benefit of assets I worked to accumulate during a marriage you helped destroy. Sophia will receive her legal share of marital property, but not a penny more. And Derek, if you're still on my property in 60 seconds, I'll call the police and file a trespassing complaint that will be part of the public record." The confrontation ended, not with violence or dramatic declarations, but with the quiet authority of someone who had planned for every contingency. Sophia gathered her immediate belongings while Derek waited in his car, both of them apparently stunned by the reversal of their carefully laid plans. As they prepared to leave, Sophia made one final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. "Marcus, 4 years of marriage has to mean something. Can't we at least try counseling?" Marcus looked at the woman he had loved completely and felt nothing but sadness for what they had lost and relief for what he had discovered before it was too late. "Sophia, you spent months planning to abandon our marriage while pretending to love me. You used our shared resources to fund your affair and discussed strategies for taking as much as possible when you left. Counseling can't fix someone who never intended to honor their commitments in the first place." 6 months after the confrontation that ended his marriage, Marcus stood in the window of his new apartment overlooking the Detroit River, watching freighters navigate the same waters his mother had pointed out to him as a child. The move back to his hometown had been deliberate, a return to the roots that had shaped his character before success and affluence had complicated his understanding of human nature. Tech flow dynamics, A growing startup specializing in cybersecurity solutions had offered him a senior architect position with a salary 20% higher than his previous job. The irony wasn't lost on him that losing his marriage had actually accelerated his career advancement. The divorce proceedings had concluded exactly as James Morrison had predicted. Sophia received her legal share of marital assets, roughly 30%, after the court factored in her documented affair and misuse of joint funds. The house had sold quickly in Atlanta's robust market, leaving Marcus with enough equity to purchase a downtown loft in Detroit's revitalized core and maintain a substantial emergency fund. Sophia and Derek's relationship had imploded within 2 months of their grand liberation, apparently unable to survive without the thrill of secrecy and the security of Marcus's income. Last he had heard, Sophia was working for a small marketing firm in Charleston and living in a rented apartment that cost more than she could comfortably afford. The legal victory had provided financial protection, but the emotional recovery had required different strategies altogether. Marcus had thrown himself into work with renewed focus, leading a team developing authentication protocols for financial institutions. The technical challenges engaged the same analytical mind that had unraveled Sophia's deception, but with constructive rather than defensive purposes. His colleagues at TechFlow respected his expertise without knowing the personal battles that had sharpened his professional edge. In Detroit, he could rebuild his identity without the weight of public failure that had lingered in Atlanta's tight-knit tech community. 3 weeks ago, an unexpected connection had emerged from his past when Sarah Chen, his study partner from Georgia Tech's computer science program, reached out through LinkedIn. She had completed medical school and a pediatric residency, establishing a successful practice in Detroit's growing medical district. Their coffee meeting at a riverfront cafe had stretched into a 4-hour conversation that reminded Marcus of the intellectual compatibility he had shared with Sophia in their early days, but without the undercurrent of performance and manipulation that he now recognized had always been present in his marriage. Sarah represented everything Sophia had pretended to be: genuinely successful in her own right, intellectually curious, and apparently free from the calculating ambition that had driven his ex-wife's choices. Their second meeting had involved a weekend visit to the Detroit Institute of Arts, where Sarah's knowledge of Renaissance painting complemented Marcus's interest in architectural design. She asked thoughtful questions about his work and shared stories from her pediatric practice with the same passion he brought to discussing algorithm development. Most importantly, she seemed genuinely interested in Marcus as a person, rather than as a provider of lifestyle enhancement. But the lessons learned from his marriage had made Marcus cautious about interpreting romantic signals and emotional authenticity. Every gesture of interest from Sarah triggered analytical processes that would have been unnecessary before Sophia's betrayal. When Sarah suggested they attend a Tigers game together, Marcus found himself wondering whether her enthusiasm was genuine or performed. When she insisted on splitting the dinner check, he questioned whether her financial independence was real or strategic. The hypervigilance was exhausting but felt necessary, a natural immune response developed by someone who had been infected by deception and was determined to avoid reinfection. The irony of his situation wasn't lost on Marcus. His experience with Sophia had taught him invaluable lessons about human nature and the importance of observing actions rather than accepting words at face value. He had learned to recognize the difference between authentic emotional investment and skilled emotional manipulation. The same analytical skills that made him excellent at debugging software systems now applied to evaluating the consistency and authenticity of human behavior. These were valuable life skills that would serve him well in all future relationships, professional and personal alike. Yet the hypervigilance that protected him also threatened to isolate him from the genuine connections that made life meaningful. Every conversation with Sarah was filtered through questions about her true motivations. Every gesture of affection was subjected to analysis about whether it represented authentic feeling or sophisticated manipulation. The trauma of discovering that his marriage had been a long-term deception had left him with defensive reflexes that might prevent him from recognizing real love when it appeared. He was caught between the wisdom gained through painful experience and the cynicism that could poison future happiness. During a late-night phone conversation with Sarah the previous week, she had gently addressed the elephant in their developing relationship. "Marcus, I can tell you're being careful with me," she had said with characteristic directness. I don't know what happened in your marriage, but I can see it left scars. I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere quickly, so you don't need to figure everything out immediately. Real relationships build slowly on trust that gets earned over time. Her insight and patience had impressed him, but also triggered more questions about whether someone capable of such emotional intelligence could be trusted, or whether her perceptiveness made her an even more skilled manipulator. The contradiction was driving him toward a decision point that his engineering mind couldn't solve through analysis alone. At some point, moving forward would require an act of faith, a willingness to be vulnerable again, despite knowing how completely that vulnerability could be exploited. The lesson his mother had tried to teach him about recognizing authentic love during difficult times remained relevant, but it needed to be balanced with wisdom about protecting himself from those who would abuse such trust. Standing at his apartment window, Marcus reflected on the words that had changed everything. I got fired today. Those four simple syllables had revealed truth that years of normal interaction had hidden. They had saved him from a lifetime of deception and financial exploitation, but they had also taught him that sometimes the only way to know someone's true character was to test it under pressure. The question now was whether he could build new relationships on that foundation of hard-earned wisdom without allowing suspicion to destroy opportunities for genuine connection. Time would tell whether the man who had learned to protect himself from betrayal could also learn to recognize and embrace authentic love when it finally appeared.